Welcome everyone. My name is Denise Demese. I'm the Director of Faculty Development for the University System of Georgia. And we welcome you to another in our webinar series. This one is with Dr. Rebecca Johnston, Interim Director for the Center for Teaching and Learning Center for Teaching, Learning and Leadership at the University of North Georgia. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca.
All right, and I think, Denise, I'm going to go ahead and just stop my video ahead of time just to be safe here, bandwidth-wise. Well, thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. I look forward to discussing all of this with you. It is no surprise to all of us that we are certainly living in still yet uncertain times, and that what happened in the spring was not something that anyone could have expected or predicted. So this presentation came out of that. So we obviously experienced a rapid transition online. I think from the point of notification to the point at which faculty were expected to be delivering instruction online was about 2 weeks. We have done an institutional survey which indicated that about 60% of our faculty members were totally unprepared to teach online because they had not done so before. So obviously, all of these changes create stress. Any kind of change creates stress because as human beings, we feel comfortable in what is known. And suddenly we're in a situation in which many, many things were unknown and were different and unfamiliar. So the first thing I'd like to do is just ask you, and my colleague Carl is going to watch the chat box and read out some of the responses. But the first thing I'd like you to do is think about what things changed for you? So,
life.
Yeah, life.
And everything.
Think about things like you used to have a routine in which you got up in the morning and you got dressed and you got into the car and there was a transition between getting up in your home environment and going and teaching. That went away. What other things changed?
Students who were doing well suddenly vanished. We got children at home 24/7, isolation, a lot more interruptions, trouble with time management.
Yeah.
Huge digital learning curve.
Yep, definitely that.
Students were really stressed.
How about interactions with colleagues and your boss? So the next thing is
students.
Taking into consideration all of those things that very suddenly changed. What was the impact on you? Many of our faculty reported that their stress levels and their general measurements of wellness decreased.
Yeah, we have a lot of comments about being exhausted, very tired, very stressed, a lot more work.
How about the uncertainty? How about the variable of the complete and total uncertainty of what is coming and when anything that resembles normal will return?
Someone mentions a lack of motivation, something that I struggled with too. The uncertainty is still terrible. I still feel very uncertain.
So finally, of all of those things, what was the most difficult thing for you? Of all of the things that we've mentioned, what was most difficult?
Not knowing, not being able to plan ahead, working efficiently, again with the motivation and lack of routine.
Yeah, and I think
missing the students.
We all experienced all of those things. So now let's flip the coin for a moment. What changed for your students? Probably most of the same things. They suddenly no longer had routines. They suddenly no longer had a transition between the home environment and school. They suddenly didn't know what to do.
Students missed the face-to-face. They struggled with the technology. They had fear with unknown and time management, had connection issues, and loss of institutional support. Students had more obligation at home, had problems with finances, there's anxiety about tests and grading.
Yep.
Had issues with motivation, some of the things being mentioned in the chat box.
Okay, and you can keep on commenting in the chat box, but I'm going to move us along a little bit more quickly. But think about what the impact was on them of all of those things. What was the ultimate impact? And then think about, from the perspective of the student, what do you think was most difficult for them? So we did some informal surveying of our student population. And so I'm going to give you for just a moment some of the responses that they gave us regarding the sudden shift to online instruction. The overriding comment, the most frequently given comment, was that the move online made classes and courses more difficult. Suddenly they were experiencing challenges they hadn't before. And here are some of the reasons that those things happened. Number one, you frequently have students who come in and sit in a classroom and don't really actively participate in discussions and don't really actively answer questions during during lectures. However, in an online environment, they can't come in and sit and have a free ride during discussions, etc. They are forced to respond for the grade. Number two, it dramatically changed the way that they are required to engage. They said that it created more work. Here are some of the reasons that that is true. There's more reading and writing. Even just instructions regarding how to do an assignment or how to proceed with a task must be read. Anything that they give to you, any communications, any assignments, must be written and submitted. So there was dramatically more reading and writing in the online environment, and this was all of a sudden in the middle of the semester as we approached finals. All instructions have to be read and comprehended, and all questions and responses are written. In addition, the students reported not knowing what to do. This was a very common response. I don't know what to do in order to succeed. There was a sudden expectation of self-directed learning. We all know that in an online class, much of the learning must be self-directed. They do it on their own. However, most of our students didn't really know how to proceed with self-directed learning. They reported that their instructors' expectations often seemed unclear. They just weren't sure what it was the instructor expected them to do. And part of the problem is that we are expert learners. We're not only experts in our content area, but we are expert learners. We know how to self-direct learning. We know how to go off on our own and research and put a project together and submit it. This is something we are familiar with, but our students aren't, particularly first and second year students, and particularly first generation students. They are novice learners. So what are some solutions for these things moving forward? The first is that I would work diligently on applying TILT, Transparency in Learning and Teaching, which is a protocol that was presented, I believe, in the previous presentation in this series. In the TILT protocol, you work on telling the students exactly what to do, making everything clear, every single component of what it is they need to do to succeed clear to them. The TILT protocol focuses on the why they are doing something and the how they are to do that thing. And it unpacks the hidden curriculum, i.e. you have your content curriculum that you're teaching, but there's also a hidden curriculum. I'll give you an example. I teach or used to teach music education, and I would frequently give a typical assignment like please take this particular musical content, which is part of the curriculum, and please write a lesson plan in order to employ Pestalozzian technique with third graders. To me, that seems very clear. But part of the hidden curriculum here is knowing how to put a particular pedagogy into a lesson plan format that can be administered. And that's a hidden piece that has to be separately taught to them. So TILT helps to make the hidden curriculum more evident. Another example is you give an assignment to students and you say, I would like for you to go out and conduct a literature review, and I would like for you to compile 10 potential academic sources that you could use to support persuasive essay. The students may or may not know how to conduct a lit review, how to evaluate those sources. Those are hidden things. The actual assignment is I want you to create a bibliography, a list of sources, but the hidden part of it must be elucidated for them. So here are the characteristics of TILT. First, you make the purpose entirely clear. Why are they doing the assignment? Why is it important? How does it relate to their overall course goals? How does it relate to program goals? And how does it relate to their overall career? The studies have shown us that if we will tell students why it is that we want them to do something, most of the time they will do it because they understand the fundamental motivation. I used to teach in high school, and I was a choral director in the public school systems. And as a choral director, we asked students to do some pretty bizarre things with their faces and their bodies in order to improve the sound. If I just ask a student to do something very bizarre with their facial expression while they're singing, most high schoolers are going to laugh. However, if I say, okay, I need you to align this vowel because if all of your mouths are in the exact same shape, it will produce a more in tune, better tone color sound. And then the students go, oh, and they're more willing to do it. The next part is to elucidate the task itself. What will the students need to do? What are the steps to follow, and which steps should be avoided? And how do you execute each of those steps? Again, we are experts, they're novice learners. Part of TILT is never assuming that they know. It's making clear all of the things that we already know and not taking anything for granted. The next is the criteria for success. And this is one that when I began employing this pedagogy in the classroom really improved outcomes for the lesson plans that students were creating. I needed to give them the criteria for success and exemplars. What would an excellent paper look like? What would an excellent lesson plan look like? What is success? What are the characteristics of a truly finished product? How does excellent differ from adequate for that assignment? And a checklist of characteristics of excellent things that they can go through and check off for self-evaluation purposes. And then finally, examples. When I began doing that, the product I got back really helped. So think about this in the context of online learning. Obviously, if we go through and carefully try to make clear every single component of what it is that we are asking students to do, A, they're more likely to successfully self-direct their learning, and B, we're probably going to get back better products. C, there will be less anxiety and frustration on the part of the students, and D, there will be less anxiety and frustration on our part. So let's take a look at some remote teaching practices that are most effective. The first, obviously, is engagement. Many of you in the chat box indicated that there was suddenly not as much face-to-face engagement. You didn't see the students. You didn't have an opportunity to interact. We lost a component of teaching that I think all of us go into teaching as a result of because we enjoy it, which is the engagement and interaction with students. So here are some ways to work on maintaining a sense of engagement in an online environment. Number one, maintain virtual office hours. I used to have a total open door policy. I would have specific times during each day that the students knew that my door was going to be open and they could come in and drop in at any time. And I would encourage that they come in and speak to me. So the virtual office hours work the same. Those are hours that you declare to the students and that you regularly maintain in which they know that they can reach you in a synchronous fashion, either through a video chat or through a phone call, or even through email. They know that you will email back immediately because those are your virtual office hours. That's critical because it helps the students to know that they can get a hold of you. Next, respond to communication quickly. This is important in general, but it is much more important in the remote environment because the students do have a sense of disconnection because of the physical distance and the lack of physical interaction. So returning to communication very quickly is important. Next, when you are communicating asynchronously with a student, or even synchronously, but specifically when you are providing them feedback, when you're communicating via emails with them, use their name frequently, more than you perhaps would in person. For example, if I were going to speak to Denise right now, I would say, "Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate that comment that you made," rather than, "Thank you, I appreciate that comment that you made." Use the name frequently because it helps the student in remote settings to feel connected and that you see them and recognize them. Next, make regular course announcements. Let the students know that those announcements are going to come every day and that you're going to be giving them important information. Why? Because it will require that they log into the course and be more engaged on a regular basis. Next, keep projects moving forward at short intervals. Most of us have large projects or summative evaluations that we are working on in courses, but it's important to move them forward in short pieces and not let the students go for a long period of time without giving them feedback or moving the project forward as a whole. Next, giving proactive feedback and supporting students in the online environment. The first recommendation is to scaffold your assignments. Give the students something to hang on to. I used to assign, which didn't seem terribly difficult to me, a 20-page research-based philosophy of music education paper. To me, that did not seem like a big deal. It was really hard for the students. And so I began slowly breaking down the components of that assignment. When I began giving it, I would get back terrible papers that I had to edit 4 or 5 times before I would get something even remotely acceptable. And then I thought, okay, so why are the students not successful? It's because they do not know what to do to be successful. Let me break this down. And so I broke it into small pieces that they would complete, that I could then give them feedback about, to move the project along and give them something to hang on to, so they didn't feel overwhelmed by the enormity of it. Next is to give immediate feedback when they turn in an assignment or participate in a discussion or take a test. Immediate feedback is critical because if you wait a week to give students feedback, they will have forgotten what they did and why they did it. If you give them feedback immediately, they'll still remember what they did. They'll still be in the same emotional state they were when it happened. It will reinforce all of the things that we want with student engagement. They'll be more likely to be engaged in the course if they are getting feedback quickly. Next, it's important to break down the idea of engagement itself and give them feedback about that. If you notice that the students are not some of the students are not as engaged as others, give them immediate feedback about that. Say, hey, I noticed that you did not participate very actively in the discussion. Here are some suggestions of ways that you could improve that. Finally, explain judgments, and judgments are grades. It's important that we don't just give a student a grade, but that we explain why we gave them that grade, what resulted in that grade. I'll give you a really great example, again, from the field of music, because that's the field that I come from. Our music students at the end of every semester perform a jury, and that is a single performance of all of the literature that they've been working on that semester. And the jury is adjudicated by a panel of judges who complete a rubric, because it's a live human performance, so the best way to assess that is with the rubric. And the rubric has all these different categories that they are judged upon. The worst thing is to, even with a rubric, complete a rubric, give a student the form, and let's say they got a D because they had fairly low scores in each of the rubric categories, and not explain why they got a 2 in a particular category instead of a 5. Legitimately, the students don't know. So explaining the judgment If a student got a C on a paper and tried really hard on that paper, and you don't explain the C, you just give them a grade, that's not going to impact how they behave in the future, probably. They'll probably do the assignment the same way again or make the same errors again. So explaining why they got the grade that they got is very important. Beyond that, stopping to explain to students what they should do differently to change the outcome in the future is incredibly important. So you got this C. Here's why I gave you the C. And here are the things that you can work on next time to improve. I've been teaching for eCore for 2 years now, I believe, and I always get really good professor evaluations in providing meaningful feedback because I go through that process. Here's what you got. Here's why you got it. Here's what you can change for next time. Work on those things. Finally, I think it's important to fairly regularly stop, and this is true for all teaching, not just in the online environment, but stop and discuss with students how they feel about their academic performance. I used to administer informal surveys about halfway through the semester, anonymous surveys, in which I would say, how do you feel about how you're doing in this course? How do you feel about how difficult the work is? And particularly in this online environment, because there are suddenly all these hidden curriculum pieces, like how to engage in an online discussion effectively, how to self-drive your learning when you're not there in the class with the professor. It's important to stop and say, how are you guys doing? How are you feeling about having to take an online course? How are you feeling about the difficulty? It gives the students a sense of agency, and it also helps you to know what things you can address and change to improve the teaching and learning experience. So let's talk a minute about the idea of a sense of personal connection, which is tough in an online environment. One thing that you can do is hold synchronous chats, i.e. chats with them in which it is happening in a synchronous live event as opposed to an asynchronous fashion. At our institution, we were discouraged, particularly during the sudden shift, we were discouraged from videoing content or trying to run synchronous courses because of the bandwidth draw on the institution. So one way around that is to simply hold a synchronous chat. I think another good thing that helps to provide a sense of personal connection is once the students as a group, as a body, have gone through a particular assignment, gather them together and go through an assignment debrief. This would be a synchronous event, i.e. through a platform like Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate, where you literally sit with the students and go and say to them, okay, how did this assignment go? These were the products we got back. How do you feel about this overall product? What things can we change for the next assignment in this online environment to make it better? Debrief. It will help the students feel connected to you, and it will help them feel connected to the course content. Finally, I think it's important to regularly just ask, how are you doing? This can happen via email, and I know it's a lot of emails, but you would be amazed how much difference it makes just for a student to get one short, personal little email. How are you doing? And it doesn't have to be in the class, just how are you doing? The students will often respond back, and I'm always stunned with the content that I get back. It does help me to feel more connected to them, but it also really helps them to feel that I'm listening and that I care. It doesn't take a long time to read those emails and just send back a very quick response. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about this with your mom. Let me know if I can help you. That's it. But that makes the students feel that sense of personal connection with you that often can get lost in an online environment. Next, I think that as professors, we have a tendency sometimes to hide ourselves, but the students can always tell when we do that. They can tell that there is a wall there. So I think sharing ourselves is very important, and there is nothing wrong with saying to the students, hey, you know, this is difficult. Having to teach this course online is providing some challenges, but we're going to get through this together. Or, you know, I'm having a difficult time this week because it rained 5 times and it knocked over 6 of my tomato plants that I was really caring about. That's a personal tidbit that will help the students to feel a sense of connection with you. And for fall, I know that the vast majority of us across the USG are going to be beginning with some face-to-face content in a hybrid fashion, in which not all of the students come every day, and there will be online components. I think it's a very good practice to start the class with a "here is who I am" PowerPoint, so the students know who you are as a person. It helps them to that you are a human being. There tends to be a sense with students in university situations that professors are gods, G-O-D with a little g. We're not. We're people with real lives and with flaws. And so sharing at the very beginning, I'll start by saying, you know, I live on a small 7-acre farm. I have a huge garden. I sell local produce. We have chickens. All of my animals have Scottish names because my last name is Scottish. These things help the students to feel connected to me. Finally, consider particularly in any course, but particularly in the online environment, doing a team building activity like you might at a conference. Icebreaker activities, things that you can do to help build a sense of community with the students in which they all have to participate. A really good one that I have used in an online course in the past is, please create a 2-minute PowerPoint describing yourself, and then go through and review 5 or 6 of your peers' PowerPoints so that everybody has a sense of who is in this course together.
Becky,
yes, sir.
let's take a pause for a moment before you get into the next section of your presentation. I wanted to raise a few questions in the chat box and talk about some of the things that's been showing up there. So you talked about sharing yourself just a few minutes ago, and Carl chatted in the box quite some time ago about sharing his own anxiety during this time, and I've seen that online and various sources also, and it helps mitigate the students' anxiety by sharing your own anxiety.
Absolutely.
And there's been a big discussion about intelligent agents, because you talked about feedback, and somebody asked, well, how do we do all this feedback without being overwhelmed with grading? And so if you want to respond to that question, you can. I'll get back to that. But the discussion of intelligent agents is in D2L, there's a way to have it set up so it automatically emails the student that, hey, you got a 90% on this quiz, or you haven't turned this in yet, or those kind of things. So
what
go ahead.
What I do is when I'm grading the assignment, it provides a box for me to make a comment, and I always just provide quick feedback in the comment. I will always say, hey, really great job doing this. The reason I took off points here was this. Work on this for next time. And that's really all it takes.
Someone else asked, should you talk about debriefing your assignments? Should that debriefing be synchronous, or can you do it asynchronously?
Personally, for me, I think it works best to do it synchronously. That provides the biggest benefit, but you could do it asynchronously. At that point, though, it would turn into something of its own assignment, I think. Holding some kind of, either through synchronous chat or through a screencasted platform works best for debriefing.
Okay, another question is, if your class is asynchronous, how do you use their name frequently? Some of that was discussed in the chat box, but please provide your own comments.
In every single written communication. So when I'm providing the brief little feedback for them after they complete an assignment, I'll say, Carl, comma, you did an excellent job with blank. Every time I communicate with them in writing in any way, I use their name.
Very good. And then one other thing that I thought was significant in the chat box was Elisa had commented when you were talking about tilt and how to provide them with details. And you were discussing earlier about all the changes that occurred because now everything's written. So she's been using videos to describe her assignments and talking about examples of what's good and what's bad in those videos. And so there was a discussion about that in the chat box. I think it's a valuable thing to talk about because there is a lot of reading. And if you can mitigate the reading, that's a good way to do it.
Yep. Either recording brief little videos, or another thing that you could consider doing is a screencasted PowerPoint with instructions in it. It's easy to manipulate. I believe if you have Chrome, you're going to get free 5-minute Screencastify videos where you can create a PowerPoint, start the Screencastify, and it will record as you move through the PowerPoint and speak. So I've used that to create content really effectively if you're not comfortable with the technology to create a video. The Screencastify works really well. There are lots of other platforms that do that as well.
Thank you. That's most of the questions in the chat box. You can...
Great. So yes, please, if there are more questions, just break right in and interrupt me. I can't see the chat box, but I want to hear what's going on. All right, so promoting wellness. When I asked you back in the beginning of the presentation how, what changed, what was the impact on you, I heard lots of things talking about stress and anxiety and frustration. The students felt it as well, and I'm positive they continue to feel it because none of us really know what's coming this fall. The first thing that I would recommend is doing some reading about, so that you can communicate it to your students, mindfulness. There's a lot of misapprehension about this word. The root of mindfulness really comes from Eastern meditative domains, but it's been used in educational settings for some time. So mindfulness is attention to the present moment without allowing your mind to cast forward in worry or backwards to negative emotions that you may have felt in the past. We all know that worry is not effective or proactive unless it motivates us to do something positive, and most of the time worry is a negative. So taking a moment to be intentionally mindful of only those things that are present right now in the physical environment is important. It can help to ground us. It can certainly help to ground the students. It's also stopping to be aware of all of the stimuli without judgment, just being aware of them, acknowledging how you feel without judgment, just acknowledging it, and working on these things in order to help mitigate some of the sense of anxiety and worry that all of us tend to carry around with us. So I'm going to take you for just a moment through a guided mindfulness activity. So I'd like for everyone to stop. Oh, sorry, went the wrong direction. I'd like for everyone to stop right now, get comfortable in your chair, and take a moment to focus on your heart rate. Where in your body can you feel your heartbeat? Can you feel it in your toes? In your fingertips? Where are you connected to the furniture or the earth? Take a moment to focus just on your breathing. Try to pay complete attention to the air as it is moving in and out of you. As you're focusing on your breathing, take a moment to pay attention to what's happening with your abdominal muscles. Are they clenched or are you relaxed? Take a moment to pay attention to all of the sounds in your environment. Take a moment to pay attention to what's physically in your environment at present. And as you pay attention to these things. If you have a thought come into your mind that prevents you from paying attention to breathing or heart rate or any of these things, just acknowledge it and go back to focusing on your heart rate or your breathing. Try not to think about things in the future or the past, but be fully in the present moment. Take another moment just to pay attention to your heartbeat, to all of the places that you can feel. And then again, pay attention to your breathing. All right, take a moment in the chat box. Just be honest. How did you feel before that activity? I felt a little physically uncomfortable because I'm sitting strangely in my chair. I had a little bit of anxiety because of some things I have to do this afternoon.
Some comments include being distracted, being tense, wound up before doing the exercise.
And then, you know, taking into consideration those things, two things. How did you feel during, and how do you feel now? I felt really good during.
More focused, more centered, relaxed. Someone is still antsy.
Typically people will report, yeah, feeling just more sort of grounded and a little more relaxed. Mindfulness is something that you can cultivate. It's something that you can tell your students about and that they can cultivate, and it doesn't take an enormous amount of time, but it can really help to draw us back in fully to the present moment, particularly in moments of anxiety or stress. And if something changed, and that was just a brief little activity, hopefully it was a positive something, and you can see how if you would cultivate this several times a day, it might improve anxiety levels. Next, I think it's important to promote wellness both for ourselves and our students. One of the primary ways to do that is through focusing on growth mindset. Growth mindset is the belief that our abilities are not fixed in stone. They can always be developed and can always be changed no matter where we are or what task we're undertaking. So I'm going to draw some comparisons between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset for just a moment. In a fixed mindset, folks believe that intelligence is basically static, i.e., I'm not good at math, I'm never going to be good at math. In a growth mindset, people understand that intelligence can always be developed, regardless of where you are in your present moment. In a fixed mindset, students tend to avoid challenges. Students with a growth mindset, however, tend to embrace challenges as opportunities to grow and learn and do new things. The likelihood is that most of us in higher education have a growth mindset because we are here. We are professors. We have risen to the tops of our subject areas. If students have a fixed mindset, they tend to give up easily. If they have a growth mindset, they tend to persist during any setback. They are persistent. In a fixed mindset, students tend to see challenge and effort as fruitless, not going to accomplish anything. With a growth mindset, they see effort as a path to mastery, to getting better. In a fixed mindset, students tend to ignore valuable and useful negative feedback. In a growth mindset, students look at that negative feedback and tend to learn from the criticism and change what they do the next time. And finally, in a fixed mindset, Students feel threatened by the success of others if they did not succeed. But if they have a growth mindset, they tend to see lessons in the success of others and then emulate those who are successful. So just talking about growth mindset with students is incredibly valuable, letting them know that no matter where your abilities lie at present, no matter how challenging this online environment is at present, you can change your ability levels by working hard. We have aptitude and we have achievement. Aptitude is literally your gray matter. It's the ease and speed with which your brain handles certain kinds of information. We're born with a certain level of aptitude in all the different modes of human processing. But regardless of the level of aptitude we have, we can always change our achievement within those aptitudes by working hard. And that is critical to communicate to students. One of the ways that you can help them buy into a growth mindset is leading them through healthy thought patterns. Okay, so you got a D on this assignment. Let's talk about, or this test, let's talk about how you studied. Let's talk about which areas of study are easy for you and which are hard, and what things you could change for next time. In addition, I think it's really important to give them personal examples, and this is my best example. In undergraduate school, I took, as a music education major, I took the math class that was liberal arts math. My whole life I thought I was terrible at math because I sincerely did not enjoy it and I avoided it. And I did not believe that my ability levels could change. So in undergraduate school, I took numbers and things for dinglings, liberal arts math. That was the only math class I took. And then I did not take another math class because it wasn't required in the Masters of Music Education until my doctorate, at which point I landed in doctoral statistics. And I thought, I had a 4.0 at that point heading into doctoral statistics. And I was like, oh, I'm going to lose my 4.0. I'm not even going to graduate because I'm not going to be able to pass this class. I don't even remember any of my algebra from high school. How am I going to do this? However, because I had had situations in the past in which I worked incredibly hard to accomplish something, I dove into it with a ferocity. I literally locked myself, true story, in my bedroom with earplugs in on Sundays for 8 hours a day and did nothing but work on statistics, on understanding it, on working, solving equations. I did that for 8 hours every Sunday. Not only did I pass that class, but I got an A. And I also discovered that I'm not terrible at math, actually. It was just that I had not worked at it because I didn't enjoy it and thought I couldn't do it. So that's important to communicate to students. You might be 5.5 feet tall, trying to play basketball with someone who is 6.5 feet tall, but you can always improve and get good at basketball. You always can. There is nothing that is fixed that cannot improve. And it's also very important to communicate to students that we as human beings tend to avoid the things that are difficult for us because it's unpleasant. It's not pleasant to not immediately be successful. So we avoid those things when in reality, what we should do is the exact opposite of that. We should work hardest on those things we're not good at. We should work hardest at those things that are really challenging because that's how we grow. Both we as instructors in the online environment and they need to have a growth mindset about our situation where we are and where we can be when we work hard together. It's important to communicate to them that their abilities are not determined. Most of them come out of high school with a fairly fixed mindset. That is because in high school and public schools, they are taught what to know and not how to think by the curriculum. I'm not going down this rabbit hole right this moment, but No Child Left Behind was a fairly disastrous piece of legislation that resulted in a shrinking curriculum and the idea that the grade is the goal rather than the creative journey. So they need to know now their abilities are not determined. Next, change can always occur. You know, you might have to work 10 times as hard to get a B on an assignment as somebody else who gets an A, but you got a B and you didn't get a D. And as I said, we have to work more on the things that are challenging, and they should go through the process of identifying what those things are. Finally, all of us have to embrace the situation, the imperfections of the situation. We're headed into fall in which there's going to be a strong online component and hybrid interaction and loss of uncertainty, and I think we just have to embrace the chaos. Carl, did you have a comment?
Not really. There's some talking about sharing personal stories with their students. Some good ones have come up.
So take a moment, everybody, to think, what are you not good at? Just for yourself, what are you quite literally, genuinely not good at? Next, I want you to think about, after you had that thought about what you're not good at, how did you feel about that? Probably negative emotions. Think back to the thing that popped into your mind about what you are not good at. Did repeated failure or difficulty cause you to feel that way? Did you decide you're not good at it because you failed at it repeatedly? For most of us, the answer to that question is yes. We had some failures, some negative experiences, and so we got into our minds that we are not good at that particular thing. Think about that from the perspective of the students. If they have had unsuccessful academic experiences with particular content or skill multiple times, they probably think they can't, and they probably feel very negatively about that. So because of that, I think it's important to remind the students that they can succeed. I retired about 7 or 8 years ago from semi-professional level competitive solo mountain biking. Yes, this was a thing that I did. 6, 9, and 12-hour mountain bike races alone, 1 24-hour. I'm tiny. I am less than 5 feet tall. And I would toe the starting line with these 6-foot Amazon women on these 29-inch wheelbase bikes. And it would look like a completely impossible situation. I probably did have to train about twice as much as somebody who with one pedal revolution goes twice as far as me on my itty bitty little bike that looks like a kid's bike, actually. But I could succeed. It just took a lot of work. And when I was first learning to ride, I fell over and over and over and over again. And if I had allowed falling to stop me, I never would have accomplished what I did. So we have to acknowledge with the students that this is legitimately challenging. Be honest. This is hard. This is hard for you. I get that. It's hard for all of us. Remind them that their abilities and the outcomes of their efforts are not fixed. They can always change. And support them with feedback and a high degree of engagement despite the online environment. And I do understand that many of you may be teaching online courses that have, my eCore courses, I think, have somewhere around, 50 students enrolled in them. That's a lot. So I'm not saying that you have to, when you do provide feedback, write an email. There's not time for that. A few sentences using the student's name, telling them why they got the grade, what to work on next time, can be very brief, will go miles and miles and miles with helping the students to realize they can succeed, with keeping them engaged, and with helping them feel a personal sense of connection to you. Finally, and this is true of all teaching, not just in the online environment, it's important to, as educators, focus on teaching the students how to think and how to work, not what to know. I.e., what to know for a test is not the goal. Teaching them how to think about things, how to study and how to work, how to be creative, those things are the goals. And we as educators have to focus on that enough that we're doing an adequate job of communicating those things to the students. finally, this is a resource that we mentioned in the very first presentation. It's Brene Brown, and I've got it in the resources list at the end of this presentation. But she has a book out, Dare to Lead, and it really is about leadership, but in my personal opinion, it applies to teaching, because as educators, we are leaders. And the idea is that being clear with people is what is most kind, even if those conversations are difficult. Conversations with students who are not necessarily succeeding in class yet, they're tough. Those are difficult. It is difficult to give constructive criticism to students. But what is incredibly not kind is not clearly communicating how to do an assignment, what it is they need to do, not clearly presenting it, and then holding them accountable when they don't meet our expectations or don't succeed. That is not kind. So that obviously harkens back to the TILT protocol, which I would strongly advocate for everyone. But the idea is that doing that is what is most kind. And certainly in our current environment, kindness and empathy for one another is incredibly critical, because this is challenging for all of us. Here are some suggested resources. And I'm going to open it up now to question and discussions. Denise, you'll have to remind me, in this particular format, can I see raised hands?
I'm not sure. Do you all see an option to raise your hand? Let me see. I might,
Denise, how do I stop sharing my screen?
it should be at the bottom where it said share screen before.
Unfortunately, that went away.
Let me see if I can take it back.
Well, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to unmute your microphone. Did that do it, Denise?
I think I did something, or one of us did something.
So are you still seeing my screen?
No.
Okay, okay.
No, all we see is Rebecca. Your name across the screen.
Got it. So does anybody, let's take a moment and let me ask this question. Did anybody else get any feedback from students that differed from what we heard? I.e., the majority of ours were saying, this is so much harder, I can't do this, I can't succeed in this environment. Some of them said, some of them just quit and said, this is not what I signed up for, because of their sense of frustration. Did anybody else get back any different feedback?
Hi, this is Carl from Dalton State.
Hi, Carl.
I think I've heard that other faculty from the school had similar episodes or similar feedback. Very early on, as soon as we got word that this was going to happen, I started reaching out to my students right away individually. I called them on the phone, I would email them individually, and all I kept doing was trying to reassure them that, while the delivery method was going to change, their focus was still on just learning the material, that I was going to be the one that would shoulder the burden of trying to make the transition as painless as possible, and that, I assured them they were not going to suffer performance-wise because of it, that I would not allow that to happen. And so I just became real flexible and understanding at that point, making sure that the students felt comfortable talking to me and telling me what they were having difficulties with or what their struggles were, any apprehensions about technology, anything along those lines. And I just, you almost have to become like Gumby, and just really kind of be able to take different shapes on. And it's just it was what I thought I had to do, and it seemed to work. I didn't lose any of my students. We all made it through the semester. The ones that were going to finish the semester finished it. The ones that had already, before the transition, been struggling, they continued to struggle. It didn't matter what the environment was. And so
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't lose anybody because of the transition.
That's good. And yeah, the technology piece of things is definitely part of the hidden curriculum. It is curriculum itself, how to use this technology, how to function within this technology. And that was also, I think, part of the biggest hurdle for faculty was figuring out, okay, how do I use this technology?
So like Carl, I reached out. I actually give a lot of talks. So I'd been flying, so I knew that it was coming. So I actually sent a survey out before we switched over to my students about technology access issues and concerns and family, whatever concerns they wanted to voice to me. And they really were very helpful. They voiced a lot of different concerns, which I heard and acknowledged and incorporated. I also, before we went, while we were still face-to-face, I showed them how I had set up, we have to use WebEx. So I showed them how we set up WebEx, how I set up WebEx for them, what the class might look like. It wasn't finished, that this is how it would look like, this is how a discussion, where they'd access this is where they would access this, that I was going to be hiding it because of course this might not happen. This is just an in-case scenario. I also emphasized the importance of understanding that it's all about the learning, and that's what I care about. And so their grades would not suffer due to the transition. And so I changed that there would be some changes to assessment to accomplish those goals of getting the increased learning and less anxiety. And so we did all of that, and I lost one student who dropped out of school entirely due to a different reason. And otherwise I lost no students. And they really, actually all morning I've been getting messages from different students who are in the class about how they're still continuing the study, listening to music and doing some of the assignments that I had built into the course. And so they did get very engaged, but they felt I was there to support them. I also increased my office hours to actually every day I taught. The 3 hours every day I taught, so available. I didn't necessarily show up for them. I was available to them, and so they felt heard. I've already reached out once to the students signed up for my large language class, and I'm going to do so again. I'll be sending out that survey again beforehand, and then on the first week of class, I'm going to set up a session which is just dealing with technological glitches. In other words, figuring out who has access problems that day and who doesn't, and how we can resolve them and get them to someone who can help them so that they feel more secure on that.
I think, yeah, and I think surveying them ahead of time before the course even starts is a fabulous idea.
I actually did it twice, and I got different answers, and some answered more when it was a reality than before, and then vice versa. So it's useful to do it twice. So I'm going to do it early before class, and I am going to do it again after the first week. They've experienced other different pedagogies and other answers and other frustrations. So for instance, one of the concerns was Phi Ed class that the student was taking and how to deal with that. And so I gave him, obviously I can't solve that. So I gave him the proper contacts to pursue that. And another one, I put him in contact with the associate dean to help him or her, I can't remember who it was, deal with the issues they were dealing with, since it wasn't anything to do with my class, but they felt supported that way, and that helps build a better community in your class as well.
Yep. And I was looking here at some of the chats going online, and even I think it's also important to acknowledge for us as instructors that even when we do all of the right things and when we are diligently working to try to help the students succeed, there may be some that we just can't. So it's important to acknowledge that as well, and to not feel frustration if there are some students who simply refuse to engage online or who simply refuse to turn work in expediently.
Rebecca, I am going to jump in quickly. It is a little afternoon now, so just to respect everyone's time, just to formally thank you, Becky, for doing this for us, and Carl for helping to moderate the chat, and thanks to all of you for participating. It's hard to present when people aren't participating in the chat, and you guys did an amazing job with that, so thank you so much. Perhaps Becky can stick around for another few minutes to answer other questions, but I want to just go ahead and say thank you so much, and we hope to see you at the next webinar, and we will be posting a recording of this and reference materials by the end of tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and feel encouraged. We can do this.